Hey everyone, and welcome back to Exposed Scandalous Files of the Elite. I am your host, Jim Chapman. And before we get into today's episode, I want to shout out a few new Patreon members that joined our global celebrity team. And first, I want to shout out Miss Shannon Fierro. And she is from Winsboro, Texas. So welcome, Miss Shannon, to the global celebrity team. And thank you so much for your support. I appreciate it and love you for it. And Gene Breeden from Vallejo, California. I also want to welcome you to the global celebrity team. Thank you so much for joining and your support. And if you're interested in checking us out on Patreon, please do so. We drop bonus episodes. We do a lot of little extra things. We upload a lot of files that you can't get anywhere else. So go check us out on the Patreon if you're interested in supporting us there. If you can't do it, I get it. A completely free way of supporting is just sharing the show and rating us on whatever platform you listen to. That helps more than just about anything when it comes to this podcast. So we're going to continue with episode 9 of our Diddy Saga. And this episode I'm going to call Diddy's New Home, MDC Brooklyn. And y'all, MDC stands for Metropolitan Detention Center. It's where Diddy is housed currently and will likely stay housed until he goes to prison. But I do have an update later on in this episode about how he is trying to get out. And quickly, if you have not had a chance, go check out Monday's drop. And it was just dropped a couple of days ago. It's episode 8 of the Diddy Saga. I cover 2 lawsuits that have surfaced and then one from way back in 2017, which is not widely known at all. So go check out episode 8 if you have not yet done so. But today we're going to pick up with Diddy, who is now behind bars. And as his new life settles in, the reality of it anyway, we're getting a lot of reports that Diddy, he ain't liking it too much. He got kind of, used to the whole freedom thing, apparently. And now he's in jail at MDC Brooklyn. And today we're going to detail all of that, plus some updates that have just came out in the past few hours that are going to blow your mind. But we're going to start off with the booking process and what Diddy went through when he went into that Brooklyn jail from the first time. Now, when you go into jail, the first thing you have to go through is a strip search, whether you're Diddy or anybody else. You got to get completely naked, bend over. You got to spread your cheeks. You got to cough to make sure you ain't got, drugs or contraband up your ass. And you have to lift your nuts up and your nut sack and show them you ain't hiding nothing behind that. And it's pretty humiliating. And so good for Diddy that he had to get humiliated like he's humiliated all these women for all this time. And from there, you go into what's known as a classifications process. And they actually have what's called a classifications officer. They're going to sit Diddy down and basically they interview that individual. And they're trying to find out, do they have an attitude that they would be hard to manage? Can they handle themselves in prison? Are they built like a brick shit house? And no matter where you put them, you don't have to necessarily worry about them getting their ass kicked. I mean, all of that comes into play. But also you look at the charges that they had. And are their charges violent charges to where they would be in a cell block with more violent people, right? In Diddy's case, that probably didn't take too long because he's a completely different situation than what a normal inmate would be. Now, his charges are serious, and even though he hasn't been charged with the most violent of violent crimes yet, they're probably coming, and these classification officers know that, but he's still Diddy. And initially, they're not going to put him in general population. Why? Because he would end up dead. There's no doubt about it. somebody will want to make a name for themselves real quick. And also keep in mind, they don't like pedophiles or people that rape people in jail. So although he probably went through that classification process as a procedure, the first place he went was actually CCR, which is protective custody, a cell by himself, right? So that's exactly where Diddy Combs gets put. And it didn't take long before rumors, they start surfacing. And I'm going to play a clip real quick from one of Diddy's former rivals. It's a guy by the name of Suge Knight. And Suge Knight was part of Death Row Records. As a matter of fact, he was the owner of Death Row Records. That was Tupac's label. Snoop Dogg was part of that label at one point. Suge and Diddy, they have a long history of not getting along. Let's just say that. And Suge is actually incarcerated currently after killing a man during an altercation during the filming of the movie Straight Outta Compton. So he was asked if he thought Diddy was in danger in jail. And here's what he said.
Maybe he should get on the Jewish diet. Because the kosher meals is way better than the food somebody else is making for you. At least they're going to come hot. They're going to come sealed, and you got to be the one to open them. I don't care who you are. Prison and jail is a negative environment. If somebody can do something to them and get a name for themselves, they're going to actually do it. All right, they can do whatever they feel they got to do to prove themselves.
So there you have it. And it has come out that Diddy is somewhat paranoid, especially as it comes to his food, and rumors have started flying that he was refusing to eat. He was fearing his food was getting poisoned. Now, his attorneys, they've come out and they've said that that's bullshit, that there's no truth to it, that he's having no problems eating, etc. But it's interesting nonetheless. And hey, I might well worry about being poisoned too. What is true is that at one point, Diddy was placed on suicide watch. And let me tell y'all about how suicide watch works in MDC Brooklyn. So suicide watch is different than segregation cells. In segregation cells, you have items that you're allowed to have. Blankets, you can have books, you can have shoestrings, things like that. You're just in a cell by yourself and you're segregated. You're not in general population. But in suicide watch, you're in a cell by yourself, but you're not allowed anything that can possibly harm you. For example, you're not allowed shoestrings. You're not allowed a sheet. You're not allowed a blanket. Obviously, you can hang yourself with these things, right? If you're a female, you can't have a bra. You're not allowed utensils to eat with. You have to eat with your hands. You're not allowed razors, obviously. You're not even allowed something to write with because you can stab yourself with a pencil, right? The correctional officers, they conduct hourly checks on you, and the facility psychologist actually meets with you several times per day while you are in suicide watch. And you don't get off of suicide watch until that psychologist clears you. And in some cases, you're completely naked in suicide watch. Now, Diddy's lawyers, they claim that although he was on suicide watch, it was not due to him being suicidal. And it's important to note, folks, that's exactly what they would say, whether he was suicidal or not. Because if he was suicidal, it would point to him having some sort of guilt or him thinking his life's over because he did what he did. He is considering committing suicide. That's basically what that's saying, because he feels like he has no way out. And lawyers don't like that because an innocent man who's not guilty, he may not look at things that way, like he has no way out. So his lawyers are going to say that he's not on suicide watch because he's suicidal, because it benefits him to not be suicidal, right? I mean, what his lawyers were saying was that, yes, he was on suicide watch, but he was allowed things in his cell and it wasn't anything like what suicide watch would typically be. And the only reason that he was on it was to get additional checks to make sure nothing happened to him in his cell. So take that with a grain of salt either way. But what I can tell you is that now he is off suicide watch and he's actually in a cell with a cellie, a bunkmate, right? And it's interesting who that bunkmate is. That is a guy by the name of Sam Bankman-Fried, otherwise known as SBF. And for those of you that are not familiar with SBF, he founded a cryptocurrency exchange. Now, eventually this cryptocurrency exchange, it collapsed and it went bankrupt. And in that process, he was found guilty of fraud, but he's yet to be transferred to prison. But Sam Bankman-Fried's net worth at one time was $26 billion. So you got two billionaires in a cell together at MDC Brooklyn. In SBF, he's not considered to be dangerous. As a matter of fact, quite the contrary. He was even having a rough time in the Brooklyn jail, and he was kind of a spoiled little rich kid, right? As a matter of fact, he was complaining at one point at the Brooklyn jail that he was not getting the right dosage of Adderall. And he was also complaining he was not allowed to follow his vegan diet. But after a rough start, a couple of the inmates in there befriended SBF and they said, we're going to tell you how to get along with everybody. He started winning over the prison population by giving them classes on how to trade cryptocurrency. And it's said that he has essentially started like a stock market, similar to what you would have on the outside, but they use prison commissary as money. So that is now Diddy's bunkmate. Let's talk about the Brooklyn jail itself. And look, there's a few other podcasts you may come across, and maybe you haven't as of this point, but I have, and I'm not going to name them. I'm not going to name this one particular one, but there's a few that don't like the rough side of jail. And they're focusing on the Diddy case right now. And I went and listened to an episode just yesterday, and they were covering that jail and how dilapidated it was. And oh, the poor prisoners, and they're going through so much. And I can't believe these prisons are in this condition. And y'all, I'm telling you, it sickened me how much they were crying over these people that were in jail. Some of them doing the most horrible shit you can possibly do. Raping people, murdering people. And they're on this podcast, and a popular podcast at that. And they're like, so sad for these prisoners over the condition of this jail. And I'm like, give me a fucking break. It's jail, people. It's jail, podcast host. It's supposed to be rough. It's supposed to be somewhere you don't ever want to be or don't ever want to go. It's not supposed to be comfortable and nice. Cry me a fucking river. That pissed me off. And if you look, you may come across this podcast. It's not hard to find. It's pretty popular. And you'll see what I'm talking about. In one particular section of this podcast, they were discussing the fact that two people had died in the jail. Well, let me tell you what stands out to me as super obvious about these particular people that are doing podcasts where they could care less about the victims and they're focusing on the people that are the perpetrators. It's obvious they know zero about jail, because if two people died in a whole year in that jail, then that's a pretty safe jail, Right here in South Louisiana, where I record at, we have Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola and several other prisons, and people die all the time. Prison is a bad place. But you know what? If you're there and you're guilty of what you did, I don't feel sorry for you in the slightest. And I think life should be as hard for you as possible. If you were a murderer or a rapist or someone who stole so much money from people that they were committing suicide because their life was over, their life savings gone because you're a fraudster, I could really care less how hard you got it in jail. Crying over jail conditions. Give me a break. So let's talk about some of the other people that have been in MDC Brooklyn, since we're talking about how some people think we should feel sorry for them, etc. I told you about Sam Bankman-Fried, who caused an untold amount of people to commit suicide because he thought it'd be a great idea to steal from them. How about R. Kelly? He's been in that Brooklyn jail. And we've all heard about R. Kelly and how he likes to sex traffic kids and screw kids and do all the sick shit that he did. Al Sharpton was in Brooklyn, in that Brooklyn prison. He actually served a 90-day stint there. And how about Michael Cohen, the former lawyer for President Donald Trump? And even Ghislaine Maxwell, who was Epstein's girlfriend. And of course, that case, a lot of similarities to this case. So these aren't good people, is the point I'm getting at. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a history on MDC Brooklyn. And let me explain to you what a detention center is, what this jail is, and how it plays into the justice system as a whole. MDC Brooklyn obviously stands for Metropolitan Detention Center at Brooklyn. And it's a facility that serves as kind of a go-between while you're waiting to be sentenced to prison, like it is in this case. For example, Diddy got arrested. He goes to this jail, and then he's got to go to trial. But at this point, they're making him remain in jail. His bond was denied. So this is the go-between. They can't send him to prison yet because he hasn't been found guilty yet. So he will be here until his trial. And then when his trial's over and he's found guilty, he'll be transferred to an actual state prison, or federal prison, actually, in his case. And that's the case for all inmates that are in this center. And they stay here until they're found guilty. And then they go to where they go for the rest of their lives in a lot of cases. And MDC Brooklyn, it houses both male and female prisoners. It has around 1,700 prisoners in total. And there have been a few incidents at MDC Brooklyn. For example, on June 29th of 2009, an inmate by the name of Ronald Atkinson, he had been arrested in connection with 6 bank robberies that occurred 12 days before he was incarcerated. Well, he goes into the jail and he gets into a fight with a correctional officer. And he punches him in the head multiple times. Eventually, other COs show up and they restrain Ronald Atkinson. Now, as a result of this attack, the officer, he was pretty messed up. He had a broken nose. He had broken facial bones. He had an eye fracture. He had 2 slip discs in his neck. And eventually, Atkinson gets sentenced to that bank robbery, and he gets sentenced to 7 years. But for that assault, he got an additional 12 years. So I hope that fight was worth it. He actually got more time for the fight. In February of 2013, a former correctional officer by the name of Nancy Gonzalez, She was caught engaging in a sexual relationship with a guy by the name of Ronald Wilson, who was an inmate. Now, he was awaiting trial for killing 2 NYPD detectives. He was screwing her in the jail. This guy eventually got sentenced to death for killing those 2 NYPD detectives. And the correctional officer, she ended up getting sentenced to a year and a day in jail for that sexual relationship. But let's feel sorry for that guy, right? And I'll give you one more notable incident at that prison. So in January and February of 2019, 1,600 inmates ended up rioting at the jail. And the reason for that, in their mind, was they had no heat and power for a week because they had a cold wave go through, and it actually knocked all the power out. And the inmates were seen banging on windows. Then they thought it would be a good idea to flood all their cells. That's where you stick shit in the toilet, toilet paper and stuff, and then you flush the toilet and you make it overflow. And so the federal authorities, they turned the water off because you're flooding the freaking prison. And that lasted a week or so. Now, to wrap that up, is Diddy at a fun place? No. Do I feel sorry for him? Hell no. You're in jail. So, another lawsuit has surfaced with regard to Diddy. And this one relates to a 2018 incident that has come out, and the lawyer for the victim in this case went on News Nation to talk about it. And I thought she did a great job of describing what her client went through. The lawyer's name is Ariel Mitchell Kidd, and she's no stranger to Diddy. She's sued him in the past for some things, and here she is on News Nation describing the nightmare her client went through.
Another new accuser says that Diddy raped her in 2018 and not at one of his parties or even his own house. I'm joined now by that woman's attorney, Ariel Mitchell Kidd, here in studio with us live tonight in New York. Thank you so much for being here. All right, so a lot to unpack there. We were talking before we got out here on set. Tell us a little bit about your client, of what you can.
Yes, so she reached out to me a few weeks ago after being referred to me by another attorney who knew I had been doing things about this case and had been sounding the horn on Diddy. I've actually sued him in another lawsuit in 2021 in Miami with Trey Songz. So she called me and told me a very horrific story about her assault and her escape from the assault. She told me that she was at a friend's house who had industry ties and was on the phone with Diddy, and he decided to come to the house. And when he came to the house, everything was fine, that there was another woman there who we've determined to be Christina Coram, KK, who Diddy talks about a lot as his right-hand woman, if you will, and that they were discussing sex trafficking her. And then that led to her being served a drink where then she started to feel woozy. And then Mr. Combs sexually assaulted her with an inanimate object, and then actually directed another gentleman to sexually assault her while he watched and pleasured himself. So she was able to escape eventually and ran out into the streets yelling and screaming, and a neighbor heard her because this happened in a quiet suburban neighborhood, if you will.
So there's a witness?
Yes, we have a witness. We also have a police report, and that was made in 2018, that she, when she initially filed the police report, she didn't name Diddy out of fear of retaliation, and more importantly, fear that no one would believe her.
Right.
So she then updated that report, and we've been working with law enforcement to have them actually look into that report. They didn't do too much then, but now they are looking more closely at it.
All right, so let's slow that down just a minute. So when we talk about what happened in that house and she's running out to the street, I can see it as you're describing it so well. Did she call the police right away? You said that obviously that there is a police report, but is she calling 911? Is she going to the neighbor's house? Can you give us any more detail about what happened?
Sure. What she did was, as she's running out the house yelling, a neighbor saw her and invited her into the home.
Okay.
And it's the neighbor who then called the police, and the police did come out at that time. They also stated that they heard cars screeching, and the neighbor went outside and saw a black SUV leaving the premises very quickly. And by the time the police arrived, of course, he was no longer there.
Well, was the neighbor able to identify who it was?
The neighbor wasn't, only that they saw the car leaving, and
Okay.
they'd only described the truck. They could not tell who was inside, but she told the neighbor at the time who it was and why they were leaving so abruptly.
She must have been terrified.
Hearing her tell this story, her voice was trembling. She was in tears. I actually had to stop her at one point and tell her, take a second, because I can tell, even having her tell me this story, reliving it, was extremely painful. It was like it happened yesterday. I can tell she's very traumatized by what happened to her. She really is looking to seek justice and looking to come out. She actually contacted me today and said that she saw something, I guess recently, that the Southern District Attorney came out and said that more victims should come forward and contact their office, and that she saw that and wanted to make sure that she would be one of those voices who would be heard.
So it has just come out that there's a video out there somewhere that someone's shopping. And this video has a very high profile individual in it. As a matter of fact, in the clip I'm about to play you, which is a continuance of the interview I just played you, Ariel Mitchell Kidd references it on News Nation. And here's what that sounded like.
I also was just recently contacted by someone who wanted me to essentially represent them in the sale of one of the Diddy tapes. So, which I declined that because...
Wait a minute. Say that again. Say that again. Back up. You're saying that there's tapes and they're being shopped?
Yes, there have been people already shopping.
We've heard about the tapes, but
yes.
The shopping thing is...
Yes, there already have been tapes leaking around Hollywood, being shopped around to individuals in Hollywood. But one particular person contacted me to shop a particular video they were in possession of, and to contact the person who was in the video to see if they were interested in purchasing the video before it became a public knowledge.
I've heard this before. So like a catch and kill.
Catch and kill, correct.
Wow. Can you, and I guess you can't reveal the person who is on
No, I
tape.
can't explain who the person was, but Mr.
High profile?
Mr. Combs was in the tape, and this other person is, I would venture to say, more high profile than Mr. Combs.
Really? Really? And you've seen it?
I've seen stills of the video.
Okay.
So
you can verify
that it exists, that it's real, that the other person in the video is very visible. It's no question if it's that person in the video. And I can tell the video is pornographic in nature.
Oh, my. All right. So we know that he videotaped a lot of activities at his home, did he? And it sounds like there was probably a lot of hidden cameras as well. Is that what is being talked about?
Yes. This was actually in his Atlanta home, at a home he had in Atlanta at one point. And it does seem that the person isn't like looking into the video. So it's, to me, doesn't seem like that person knows they're being videotaped. It doesn't seem like they're active participant in the videotaping, like they're being surreptitiously recorded it.
Mm-hmm. All right. I wanted to ask you about the police report we talked about, but when your client came out, obviously the neighbor knew. Did she talk to her family? Did she talk to her friends? Did she have another lawyer? Let's go back to your client.
So at the time, she, as most rape victims are, they feel a lot of shame.
Absolutely.
And they don't want to vocalize what happened to them because then it makes it real. So they kind of internalize it and get over it. Mm-hmm. And due to the high profile nature that it was Mr. Combs who did this, she was afraid for her life. She was concerned that if she was to come forward and say something, that no one would believe her, because we're talking about 2018 when Mr. Combs was still pretty much at the height of his career, still very much so an icon and influential figure. Mm-hmm. So she's just a young girl from Northern California who's going to believe that he had done something to her like this. So she didn't tell anybody. She did not hire an attorney. All she did was make the police report in the hopes that maybe the police would try to investigate and come up with anything. But she said she kind of felt from the police that they were disregarding what she was saying, even without saying Mr. Combs' name. So she didn't feel any confidence that revealing his name would have done anything.
Sure. I mean, but there's a police report.
Yeah.
I mean, that fact in of itself is a big deal, because when you're talking about going back in time and talking about these allegations from other alleged victims, you know, there's not a lot of police reports, but you guys actually have one. And is that going to be revealed? Are we going to be able to see it?
Yes. As soon as I file my lawsuit in civil court, I will be attaching the criminal complaint that was made. I'll attach the number so everyone can see that this is a real number and can go to the police department there and request their own copy of that police report that was made back in 2018.
Well, that's going to be a huge deal when it happens, obviously. So we want to follow up on that. Did Mr. Combs have any reaction? Do you know if he was interviewed? I mean, he was named in the police report.
I don't think so. Based on what she said, she really felt that the police were trying to bury this and disregard her claims and not really investigate, which is another reason why a lot of victims don't report these things to the police. We have to address the elephant in the room is that we have victims, especially women, who go to the police, who are typically men, who don't actually investigate these things. They victim blame, they victim shame, and women don't feel safe or even protected to even make these claims because they don't think they'll be taken seriously, nor will their claims be investigated.
Right. Well, your client should be proud of herself for filing that claim and making that call and going for help, because that's a huge deal. And of course, these are allegations. We want to say that. What was it like for you when you got this phone call, when you realized what you were going to be stepping into?
After talking to her, I just wanted to protect her. I just wanted to help her. She seemed as somebody very broken by this experience. And it was very concerning for me to hear her saying these things and expressing this very deep trauma associated with what happened to her. I just wanted to make sure that, number one, she was heard and we can get her voice to the masses, and maybe Mr. Combs will actually, like right now we're starting to see, will actually face some type of consequences for what he's done.
Now, a couple of things that bother me with what Ariel Mitchell Kidd said in that clip. First, she said she had not actually seen the video and that all she saw were stills, meaning pictures that, you know, like screenshots of the video. But I pay attention to what people say probably harder than most people. I'll focus on it a little bit harder than most people. And later on in that interview, she said she felt the person being recorded didn't know they were being recorded because they never looked into the camera. Well, how would you know that if you were just sent screenshots, for example? How would you know the person never looked into the camera? I mean, if it's a 10, 15, 20-minute video and you're sent a few stills, how do you know that at some point they didn't look into a camera? Unless you've seen the actual video. I don't know if I believe she hasn't seen that video. I just found that interesting, kind of strange that she wouldn't just say, yes, I've seen the video. But those two statements don't add up. Some other news that has just broke on the Diddy case and that I just want to comment on quickly is that Diddy says he's going to testify in his own trial. And I would tell everyone that's listening right now, don't count on it. That would actually probably be the worst thing that he could do from a legal standpoint. And I guarantee you his lawyers are going to fight him on that tooth and nail. I think that's just a ploy to win over public opinion because in his mind, he's thinking, oh, if everybody thinks I'm willing to testify, they're going to assume I'm innocent and that I want to prove my name. I don't think he has any intention at all of testifying. I think he is trying to gaslight the public right now. And that just shows you how much of a manipulator he is if you didn't already figure it out. No fucking way Diddy is testifying on his own behalf. Now, I would love it. I'd love to see that asshole get on the stand and face all these charges and comment on them. But it ain't going to happen. I can tell you. Now, you may wonder, has anyone come out in support of Diddy during all of this? And actually, just a few days ago, and much to my dismay, Luke of the 2 Live crew, Luther Campbell, he comes out and he's defending Diddy. And let me tell you how dumb his defense was. He says that because Diddy was in a lawsuit with a vodka company that he was partners in, that this is all related to that they're doing everything they can to ruin Diddy. Come on, Luke. You've seen the video of him beating the shit out of Cassie in the hallway of that hotel room. It's obvious to me this guy likes to beat on women. And with the amount of women that have come out with all of these allegations, there's absolutely no way all of them are lying and doing it because a vodka company wants them to. Do you know how humiliating it must be for the majority of these women to do this? It's disgusting. I mean, they have video evidence, and a lot of it, they ain't even dropped yet. I guarantee you the evidence they have is probably so staggering. What they got out of those houses, so staggering, it's going to blow people's minds. And yet, Luther from 2 Live crew, he's going to look like an idiot when that comes out. Anybody, y'all, anybody that speaks up for Diddy right now, outside of his immediate family, which I get, look, the worst people in the world have somebody somewhere that loves them, and I understand blood speaking up for blood, but anybody outside of that, in my opinion, you can't be that dumb. And another thing that comes out is some of the things that the Department of Homeland Security pulled out of Diddy's house when they raided it. And one of those things was 1,000 bottles of baby oil. And I kid you not, y'all, this is how stupid some lawyers think the general public is. So Diddy's lawyer comes out and he speaks to Mark Levine, who owns TMZ. And Mark Levine asked him about that 1,000 bottles of baby oil. And his response was that Diddy had a big house and that he shops at Costco and he buys in bulk. I mean, come on. Then he acted like he didn't know what the baby oil would be used for. How dumb do you think the public is? And incidentally, it has also come out that Homeland Security pulled out over 750 dildos out of Diddy's house. I guess he buys those at Costco too. Now, just in the past couple of hours, Diddy, his lawyers have requested bail for a third time. If you'll remember, the first and second time that bail was denied. And he kind of sweetened the deal in this third request, and he added some new lawyers to his legal team as well in an attempt to get this accomplished. So I'm going to reference the article from the AP real quick, and it reads like this. On Monday, the rapper's lawyer submitted a notice of appeal to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, asking the court to overturn the judge's decision to keep Diddy locked up in the Brooklyn jail while he awaits trial. In the filing, Anthony Rico and Alexandra Shapiro, Mr. Combs' latest additions to his legal team, said the music mogul promised to ban women from entering his home, undergo weekly drug tests, and to not meet anyone considered a witness or co-conspirator if his release on bail is granted. I mean, he promised, y'all. No women other than Mr. Combs' mother and the mothers of his children would be allowed at his home. Well, one of the mothers of his children is dead. We'll get into that in a follow-up episode at some point. The fresh appeal comes off the back of 2 failed bids to be released ahead of his trial. Mr. Combs' legal team previously put together a $50 million bail package, including the surrender of his passport and putting him under 24-hour surveillance. However, the judge denied it, citing with the prosecution that the 54-year-old is a flight risk and danger to the community. For nearly a year, Mr. Combs has faced a series of lawsuits accusing him of sexual abuse, rape, and misconduct. In March, federal agents raided 2 of the rapper's homes. Then last month, he was charged with sex trafficking, racketeering, and transportation to engage in prostitution. In the indictment, federal prosecutors allege Mr. Combs and his associates threatened, abused, coerced women and others around them to fulfill his sexual desires. And it goes on from there with a lot of stuff I've already told you. But his lawyers also spoke on his state of mind. They said his state of mind is actually remarkably positive. His lawyer said, I spend several hours with him every day. His resolve is strong and he's engaged. He continued with, he focused on his defense and he has come to terms with the fact that this is where he is for now. The lawyer added that Mr. Combs is very eager to testify at his own criminal trial. I don't know that I could keep him off the stand, the attorney said. I think he's very eager to tell his story. I think he will tell every part of his story, including what you see on the video, referring to the shocking surveillance footage that emerged in May showing Diddy physically assaulting his ex-girlfriend Cassie Ventura in 2016. The rapper's next hearing is scheduled for March 9th. There is nothing, y'all, that Diddy can say, even in his own defense, which ain't going to happen because he ain't going to take the stand. He's doing this to manipulate everybody. But even if he did, even if I'm wrong, there is nothing he can say that can justify him running up behind a woman, yanking her by the hair, pulling her down, kicking her, and then dragging her by her neck around a hallway. Nothing he can say to defend that. Pisses me off. So there you have it. That is the most updated information I can bring you on the Diddy saga. This is the 9th episode in our series. There's no telling how many there'll be. As this goes on, we will go on, and I promise you, I will keep you updated. Patreon national and global celebrities. I'm going to upload a file by tomorrow, and it's going to be the actual handbook that Diddy got. It's not his actual handbook, but it's the same thing that Diddy got when he went into MDC Brooklyn. It is what they give incarcerated individuals when they get there. It's the rules and regulations. It's in PDF format. I thought you might find that interesting, so I'm going to upload that. And we have a ton of new people listening to this show. I checked the Apple Podcast download ratings today, and y'all, we are number 34 as of this recording out of 106,000 plus podcasts in the society and culture category. Number 34, nothing to do with me, everything to do with all of you and your sharing of the show and your support of the show. And I absolutely love every single one of you for it. Thank you so much. And for those new listeners, if you're new, we drop episodes every Tuesday and Thursday. We're doing 2 ongoing series right now, Murdaugh and Diddy. The Murdaugh series drops every Tuesday, and we're going to drop an episode of Exposed every Thursday, unless some Diddy news pops up that is just breaking, and then we might replace that regular episode of Exposed with a Diddy Saga series episode, or we may drop 3 in 1 week like we did this week. What you're listening to now is our 3rd episode this week. So we try to keep our feed very active here at Exposed. And look, make sure you're notified and updated when these episodes drop, because they can drop sporadically throughout the week when we have breaking news. So you can hit a notification bell or subscribe wherever you're listening. There's usually a bell that you can hit, and it just subscribes you where it notifies you when new episodes drop. And that way you can stay updated. Thank you so much. And I want to thank all of you for listening. And until next time, for Exposed Scandalous Files of the Elite, I'm your host, Jim Chapman. Much love.